Today we're working on a PlayStation 5 motherboard and it has prior repair attempt damage. And I say attempt because not only did they not repair the HDMI port, they made other things a lot worse. And I thought, why not make a video if I'm going to tackle this project? Here is a flux nightmare on the back side of the HDMI port. And we're going to flip it over and show you the top side. Maybe. I mean, look at this. This it's so bad. But that's not the worst of it, because I think this all looks salvageable. Here, let's zoom in on this. Okay. So this port is like not in good shape, but you can probably see lots of bridged pins. Doesn't look like it was seated flush. The coupling capacitor right there on pins 17 and 18 is missing right there. What's up, man?
Got a customer on the phone. He says he called in already and got a quote about installing a hard drive into his PS4.
Yeah.
He said it was like $50 or $60 is what he was quoted because he's providing a hard drive.
It's possible. Okay. People called the store saying, we're talking about emails, and it's like the retail store, they don't have access to the emails. I mean, it's just, if you sent an email, send an email. Why all of a sudden call and then confuse things? But we do have other damage on this motherboard. That I got the retail store employees trying to help out. So they come and ask me, see how damaged this connector is. This is for the front USB ports, and that's not going to work. So that'll have to be replaced. But what's worse is on the back side there, you can see they put a long screw where it wasn't supposed to go, and so now it's damaged these trace lines. And so even if I replace that USB connector, it's not going to work unless I can fix those. And I can run a jumper wire from here to here. I'm concerned though, if these are touching ground plane, then that can cause a problem. But having the working USB ports might be secondary to having the HDMI port work. So the first thing I'm going to do is replace the HDMI port and then test it, see if we could have that working, and then we'll move forward with the USB situation. Let's start with removing the old port. I lost my tweezers. How the heck does this happen? I just used it to install a different port. Well, I guess I'm going to use different ones. Okay. Let's take this off. It doesn't look like we have any damaged pads. That's amazing. Let's wick up all the solder. Anytime I do previous work, I always remove all the solder that is on there, because sometimes people try to install, because it's easier to work with low melt removal solder, which is brittle and you can't use it for final install. So anytime I'm doing prior work, I always remove all the solder. So all this brown stuff is likely burnt flux. If you're using a good no clean electrical flux, that shouldn't look like that. Most likely indicator is that someone used plumber's flux, and it's important to clean off the plumber's flux because it's corrosive. So now we're going to go to work trying to clean that off. Some of this is cleaning off nice, other ones aren't. can see over here it looks nice and pink again. So what I'm going to use to try and clean this up a little bit more is a stainless steel scraper, and that's going to help break off a lot of that junk. Okay, this generally is going to look a lot better. It's not going to look perfect, but that's the consequence of doing bad work. I got to check out the other side of the board. Look at how absolutely nasty that is. I don't understand, even if you're using the wrong materials, why you wouldn't want to attempt to clean any of this up. Okay, I want to put a little bit of heat on here. Hopefully I can melt some of that flux enough to wipe it off. Yeah. Oh, it's so nasty. You know, you do get charged extra for this. And I mean, we try to keep the cost reasonable, but you got to be realistic here. A non prior attempt HDMI port would long be done already. So this is creating a lot of extra time on the workbench, and workbench time costs money, because if I wasn't working on this, I'd be on to the next project, creating monetary value by fixing something else. So the longer I got to spend working on a device like this, I gotta charge for it. That's the thing. So back to the steel scraper, and I just noticed, you got to notice here, we're missing a diode here. We're missing a diode here. There might be a component there or there. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check. See, some spots are empty by default, but it's hard to tell when someone's made a big solder mess and they got solder on copper where there never was a component, but once you got solder there, it looks like something was removed. And so I need to reference another of this board version to inspect whether there's supposed to be something there or not. All right, at this point we're going to jump forward. Okay, yes. Here is a donor I have of the same board revision, and there is components in all four of those spots. So I believe in my parts bin I do have both of the diodes, because they get commonly knocked off for whatever reason. The other two components I don't. So I'm going to harvest these donor parts and put them on the board we're working on. All right, first thing I'm going to do on my donor board is remove these components. The tweezers that I'm using, we sell on our website. They're nice, long, fine point tweezers that have holes in them to help dissipate heat. And that makes them very nice to work with. I have several on my workbench that I use every single day. Okay, now back to the board that we're installing on. Now, since I don't have an HDMI port on there, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm heating from underneath, and that honestly makes this a lot simpler. I'm going to prep the pads with some leaded solder. Okay. Now, let's start with the big guy. And then we'll do this one. Now that tiny little capacitor, this is like size 201. Then the smaller diode. Good. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of flux to make sure that these all flow into their spots nicely. And now I can remove the heat. And those parts aren't going anywhere. I'm about to flip the board over and heat from the bottom side. And I'm not worried about those parts flying anywhere. They're installed correctly. Surface tension is going to hold them in place when I start putting hot air on that area again. Back on the top side, I'm going to install this little capacitor first. And since I wicked off all the solder, I need to re-tin it. And you know what? While I'm doing that, I'll just tin all the pads here. Now, I've already got the capacitor I'm putting on resting on the board right here. We're just going to push it on over. Maybe. Oh, too much flux. There it goes. Now, I'm going to pre-flood all the anchor holes with solder. And I'm going to be ready to drop the new port on. And we're going to put some more flux in there to help the solder flow and attach to things. We're going to put it right where we want it. Hold it down with a little bit of pressure and remove the heat. And as soon as that solder is hardened, I can remove the pressure. I actually like to wait until I see it harden and then kind of count to 5, but I'll just talk instead of counting. All right, that should be on there. Let's clean it up. And right now you're seeing what I was talking about. If I didn't have to deal with someone else's mess, you could see how quickly a standard HDMI port job can be. And that's why when there's all that extra work, that it's necessary that we have to charge more. Because otherwise, my helper is waiting for me to, he's already done the teardown on the next thing, and he's waiting for me to be ready to work on it. And instead, I'm working on this thing a lot of extra time. Let's go ahead and check the pins. I'm just gonna push on each one slightly, make sure it's connected good. If it wasn't, then I could come back with my micro soldering iron and, you know, touch it up. But this is solid. HDMI port job is done. We're hoping that as long as the encoder is good, that this thing will display on the TV, because the console did power on, surprisingly enough. But we're gonna make sure that's working, and then we'll come and look at the USB connector. Okay, the video output did work. And because replacing that USB connector and fixing the screw damage was going to be a substantial additional cost, we called the customer and asked if they wanted to. And they said, no, if the rear USB ports work, I'm not worried about the front ones working. And the back ones did work fine. I was concerned that it would cause a USB error, but it didn't. And so since the customer doesn't want to move forward with that, unfortunately, I don't get to include that in the video. This job is done. We do mail-in repair, and we tackle things whether they've been open or not, whether someone else has worked on it or not, DIY failures, the full bit. Company's called DVD Game Exchange. Website is dvdgameexchange.com. You can organize a repair right there.